The death of President Franklin D. Roosevelt on April 12, 1945, took the world by surprise. Although the people close to him feared his time was near since his re-election campaign. But the public was not aware of the seriousness of his condition. The president secretly left for a conference after his inauguration on January 20th. On March 1st, he gave a speech to Congress. Legislators were shocked by his sickly appearance. 6 weeks later, President Roosevelt died at his home in Warm Springs, Georgia, also referred to as the Little White House. The past speaks to us. Let's go see what it has to say. The morning of his death, he slept in. He had a slight headache when he awoke. He ate breakfast around 9:30 a.m., later sat in his desk to go over some State Department papers while chatting with some visiting cousins and friends. Roosevelt continued doing routine work while an artist worked on his portrait. By 1 p.m., the artist was just filling in colors around the portrait because Roosevelt had slipped down in his chair and she did not want to disturb him. He lit a cigarette, raised his left hand to his forehead, and pressed. Suddenly, his hand fell with his fingers twitching. One of his cousins asked if he had dropped something, and he mumbled, "I have a terrific headache." Then Roosevelt's arm fell to his side, his head sagged, and his entire body slumped in the chair. He was then carried into his bedroom where he died at 3:35 p.m. The first radio news of his death went out that afternoon. The president's body was moved from his Warm Springs home to an awaiting train. The streets of Warm Springs were lined with spectators to bid the president goodbye. Even his dog followed along. A slow procession by train carried the president's body back north to Washington, D.C. The tracks were lined with emotional citizens. Roosevelt's sudden death stunned the nation. Sentiments were magnified by the fact that Roosevelt had been president for over 12 years. Young Americans had no memory of any other president. A full military procession took the president from the train station to the White House. The streets were lined with units of military and thousands of grieving citizens. At least 500,000 people watched silently in the hot April sun. Due to World War II, it was decided that Roosevelt would not be given a state funeral because any public display during a time of war was deemed inappropriate. His body laid at rest in the East Room of the White House for a very short time, while a private Episcopal funeral service was conducted. Only family members, close friends, high government officials, members of both chambers of Congress, and heads of foreign missions attended. Though there was no line in state in the Capitol Rotunda, flags were lowered to half staff at the White House and the Capitol. After the private funeral services were held in Washington, D.C., Roosevelt's remains were transported on a funeral train to his Hyde Park, New York residence, Springwood Estate, for interment. At Hyde Park, the casket was transferred to a horse-drawn gun carriage and carried up the hill to the estate, preceded by a military band and a battalion of West Point cadets. Limousines containing President Truman, the Roosevelt family, and close associates followed. The president was buried in the Rose Garden at Hyde Park. The rector of St. James Episcopal Church read the burial services. 3 volleys were fired over the grave, and taps were sounded as the casket was lowered to its final resting place. In September 1941, the president called his friend, Supreme Court Justice Frankfurter, to the White House and asked the justice to remember the wishes he then expressed. If any memorial is erected to me, I know exactly what I should like it to be. I should like it to consist of a block about the size of this, putting his hand on his desk, and placed in the center of that green plot in front of the Archives building. I don't care what it is made of, whether limestone or granite or whatnot, but I want it plain without any ornamentation, with the simple carving in memory of